Good morning, dear participants of our forum. So some of us are connected via online and others are physically present. So we are participating in the Digital Agri Forum. First of all, we have to understand how we're going to live, how we're going to live with a Green Deal, because whether we like it or not, we will still have to change ourselves and to change our life. In particular, because the European Parliament just a couple of days ago adopted the Common Agricultural Policy. Well, for any ordinary user, it doesn't say a lot, but this document in particular regulates our life, our eating habits, and how much we're going to pay once we go and do some shopping. In this stream of our forum, we're going to talk to decision makers, to the legislators, and who are introducing all the changes into the sector and into the environment that we live. We're going to have a discussion of two parts. First of all, Bronis Ropė, the MEP, and Viktoras Pranckietis, the member of the Seimo Committee of Lithuania. He's also a person who has something, also contributes to the Common Agricultural Policy, as well as we have Herbert Dorfmann, a member of the European Parliament, and Arūnas Svitojus, chairman of the Chamber of Agriculture of the Republic of Lithuania. So hopefully everybody can hear everybody. So Mr. Viktoras, can you hear us? Hopefully you can hear me and can see me as well. So what do you think about the Green Deal? What is your take on the Green Deal, and how do you believe if we are going to succeed it or not? So I think that, first of all, we shall think that we shall not be too easygoing about this concept, and we shall not be complacent. Why am I saying this? Because there is an ongoing discussion on the Green Deal, what it is, what does it mean, and what is sustainability, and how it is going to have an impact on the final producer who will have to implement this Green Deal initiative. I think we shall not be overambitious. In this case, it turns out the ambitions have been set really high. The goals have been set. The program has been signed off. But this ambition calls for consistent changes in the lives of the people. But these ambitions shall not be too frightening and too wide-scoping. And therefore, we shall not confront each other. And this discussion is a very, all the more relevant and very much timely. I'm the chair of the Rural Affairs Committee of the Seimo of the Republic of Lithuania. In this committee, we have been discussing about all the rules and regulations applicable for us in Lithuania. Well, the good news is that the European Commission has finally made its mind that it's up to the member states on the way forward to set the goals that have been set for us. This is also bad news at the same time, because this leaves a lot of room for interpretation, the way we understand it, the way we see them, the way we believe things need to be done. And unfortunately, it is not always reflecting the situations on the ground, in the countryside, in rural areas. Over the past year, I have participated in a number of conferences myself. And I remember one of them, and then was an interparliamentary conference organized by the Polish Parliament on the Green Strategy. I remember there was also a similar conference by the Portuguese Parliament, the European Parliament, along with the National Parliament. Also hosted a discussion with the Rural Affairs Committee. So I believe that all of us are seeking the same goals, and we want to achieve our political agenda goals. all the measures that have been foreseen to be implemented by the people who will have to face it and deal with these measures, these people shall benefit from the relevant assistance or financial support. Well, speaking about Lithuania, I believe that in terms of the distribution of the funds under the cap, if 25% are to be dedicated to the green initiatives, a person may choose not to opt for such 25%. What I mean to say is that people should be interested in availing of this 25% of additional bonus if they're going to implement the green deal initiatives. I think that we shall talk quite a lot about the fact that we are amidst the activities which have to be continuous. First of all, we have some historical background where we stand now. And the Lithuanian history in our context is as follows. Animal husbandry, it used to be our advantage maybe for the past 100 years. Unfortunately, it has been going downwards. And I believe we can't speak about green initiatives by leaving animal husbandry aside. A second thing is that from a historical point of view, during our independence years, there has been a very high level differentiation among the farms. We have very small or micro farms, others turned into medium-sized farms, whereas we have also very large farms as well. Unfortunately, this differentiation is as it is, and we have to live with that. In terms of the small farms, I think we need to say that they will the majority of small farms would no longer be economically viable without any financial support. We may even call them a social, some sort of a social farming, because at the same time, we shall not forget the people. There is a fraction of people who live in the rural areas, and their farm is the only way of subsistence. So, having in mind the greenhouse gas emissions and all the other Green Deal initiatives, we shall always have the people in mind. So, in terms of continuity, this intensive, I would identify the ecological or organic development plan and farming in less favored areas. I could identify the following sectors which are the priority for us. Now, moving on to the production. I think that intensive farming or intensive production farms have all become such because they had all the knowledge, all the necessary knowledge in order to make their developments and their transformation happen. And the goals that we're going to set for large farms are going to be also easier to be achieved. Whenever we talk about our social partners, we always emphasize that if there is a certain measure, it has to be financially supported. For instance, we haven't stopped talking about the use of manure or sludge. Luckily, manure is no longer considered as waste, it is considered as fertilizer. And it took us 10 years to change our mindset. So far, we still have a road to go before we use the manure 100%. So there are challenges, how to promote animal husbandry, and at the same time, we have also to use the waste, which is no longer considered as waste, the manure, which is considered as fertilizer. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity, and the sequestration of carbon into the soil is the path we shall follow. In terms of our future objectives, they should be very much in line to the European goals, which is a carbon neutral economy. And for that reason, we are building and developing ecosystems to allow the people to choose the way forward in order to achieve the goals set under the Green Deal initiative. And these rules and regulations should very much reflect our possibilities. The possibilities are always reflected by what our producers say. And this brings me to where I have started from. Ambitions are usually political ones. And when it comes to practical implementation, these are the producers who have to achieve these ambitions or to put them into practice. So we should strike a balance between these two. Animal husbandry and development of animal husbandry, I could hardly call it the development, because I believe that over the past decade or so, this sector has shrunk by 1/3 compared to its previous levels. I believe that there is still some room for further development in animal husbandry by way of introducing some organic husbandry principles. The background of shrinking animal husbandry were also destroying the meadows. Just to give you an example, if a farmer decides to phase out animal husbandry production and by way of preserving a meadow, a farmer would get 50 euros for preserving the meadow. Does he really need 50 euro if he may have rapeseed crops instead and get this financial support in hundreds of euros? So we have to think very carefully when we introduce one or other support measure, so that the farmers are no longer more or less living on the verge of bankruptcy. I remember that the Danish agricultural minister in one of the conferences said, and the paragraph 2 was that we shall not have the farmers on the verge of bankruptcy. That was her idea in her speech. Whenever we talk about animal husbandry, we can always approach it from a very broad perspective. Yesterday, we had an idea in the Seimas proposing of cutting down on animal husbandry because it produces certain ways. For instance, yesterday we discussed in the Seimas the initiative of banning the fur animal husbandry. And by the way, these goals may have a completely different consequences. So we shall always be much more broader in our thinking. In terms of biodiversity and water treatment and agriculture, these areas, it is no surprise to anybody that 60% of all agricultural land in Lithuania has been drained with dry drainage system. And now we start talking about restoring the brooklets or rivulets that used to run through these meadows hundreds of years ago. So from a farmer's point of view, the situation is very clear. That would be a destruction of the system. I believe that the long-standing ecosystems and any disruption of long-standing ecosystems, just for the sake of preserving the historical justice, then we can go as backwards to the history as to the times of the Grand Duke of Vytautas, or to the I remember that in the times of President Smetona, we had only 16% of forests. Nowadays, we have 33% of all the Lithuanian territory covered by forests, while on a national scale, it is quite a large scale. Well, nowadays, we have double the amount compared to the pre-war level of forestation. And nowadays, when we start talking that we shall further expand the land covered by forest up to 40%, I do understand that we may regard this 40% as an ambitious goal, but that would be at the expense of some land that could be used in active production. So who could agree to use the available agricultural land for forestation purposes? What needs to be said about invasive species? Whenever we talk about the climate change, and I believe this is a fact, and we have a lot of invasive species which are encroaching upon the usual habitats, and we have very few measures to control their prevalence. And at the same time, there is a huge prevalence of invasive species and list of authorized pest treatment chemicals, which is much shorter. So if we want to have a very well-nurtured nature and at the same time to have an appropriate amount of food, we shall always strike a balance between those interests. And let me complete my speech. I saw who is participating in this conference. I see that the people are the ones who are choosing the digitalization path and into the innovations. Innovations should also come to the agricultural field. So I would like to wish everybody all the possible success for the participants of this conference. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your great speech. It's really good that we started off mentioning land-related issues, and now we will go to the next level. We will listen to another presenter who probably voted for the new CAP policy. Hello, is Mr. Ropė with us?
Bet dar ne viską padarėme turbūt.
It seems that there is room for improvement in terms of digitalization. Can you hear me? Yeah, you are online.
Girdėjote kolegos pasisakymą apie žemę, apie
Did you hear the presentation of Mr. Pranckietis about land, forest, drainage, and so on? All of these issues are very important. We all have to live with them and improve them. Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's a very good time for such a discussion. Several days ago, the Parliament adopted the Common Agricultural Policy for the period from 2023 to 2027. We didn't have the time to make an agreement for 2021 and 2022, so we just extended the previous CAP policy. So the next policy will be 2 years shorter. Actually, I did not support this policy, and I have mentioned this in media. Anyway, it has been adopted, and this is a document drafted in 2018. It was discussed, and there was no discussion about any Green Deal whatsoever back then. This document does not actually speak about the Green Deal that much. It only contains several details, whereas the Green Deal is a separate package of documents, which will be implemented from the recovery fund. In Lithuania, the recovery fund will not be used for the agriculture, so the Green Deal will be implemented in the extent it is stipulated in Common Agricultural Policy. Let me bring your attention to the news and differences in this document as compared to the previous one. Generally speaking, Common Agricultural Policy is not a revolution, or rather evolution, and much will depend on the attitude of the member states, on their ability to agree, to coordinate the implementation with the farmers' organizations, coordination among politicians, implementers, and all other stakeholders. All these efforts should be directed into the reaching the common goal and achieving the best possible outcome for everyone. So one of the new things stipulated in CAP is a strategic plan, which was not compulsory to member states before. Now each member state has to finalize strategic plans and to deliver it with an explanation of their vision of implementation of their obligations under CAP. Another thing I want to say is that the European Parliament held a different position, but during the negotiations with the member states, it was noted that they required a lot of flexibility, which I was not happy about. It's possible that the common agricultural policy in the end will not be that common because there are many options for the member states to act at their own discretion. Therefore, it is very important, as I said, how the member states will coordinate the implementation of the goals. Speaking of the strategic plans, the most essential thing is going to be changed. The previous Green Initiative was compulsory to the state and the farmers. It was regulated. It was rather common for the entire Europe, and it was not effective. So the greening problem was replaced by environmental schemes. At the beginning, we spoke about 30%, then we ended up with 25% of the entire support, which should be allocated to the environmental schemes. And one of the reasons why I didn't support CAP was that we wanted to ensure similar environmental schemes that would be used by all member states. Unfortunately, the Commission failed to come to such an agreement, and therefore the member states may draft environmental schemes at their own discretion and then deliver them to the Commission to approve. So an important thing is that these schemes are not compulsory to farmers, but are compulsory for the member states. If the farmers do not participate in those schemes, they will not receive 25% of the direct payments. So it's a very relevant question how the member states will cope with it. Will they be able to engage the farmers to participate in these environmental schemes? Because if the funds are not used, they will be transferred to the second pillar, rural development, and used for climate programs, not for environmental farming, and not for whatever people come up with. There are some other new aspects regarding retaining of wetlands, crop rotation, and other aspects. And farmers with the farms up to 10 hectares will not have to participate in these schemes. And we have about 90% of such size farmers in Europe, whereas in the Baltic states and Eastern countries, the farms are larger. So these aspects will not touch upon too many farmers. Another piece of news is related to the fact that the payment ceiling has not been established, and it's up to the member states again. However, there is an obligation to transfer 10% of payments to small farms, young farmers, and this is something compulsory. This way, payments regulation is rather straightforward, and much depends on the decision made by member states. More attention is paid to environmental farming, organic farming. The policy sets different directions, different indicators. Some things look like a dream, but well, sometimes it's nice to have dreams. Organic farming will cover not only the second pillar, but will also be supported from the first pillar, environmental schemes. So organic farming will get more possibilities if they are used, of course. I was also sorry to see that the leader program was reduced by 1%. And to finish off, I would like to mention some positive developments. Although CAP financing has been reduced for 2021-2027, however, financing allocated to Lithuania has been increased, and this is something positive. Direct payments increased by 30%, and it is extremely important to make sure that this funding is received by the farmers. Like several other countries, Lithuania has seen the increase of arable land, and due to this, payments per hectare will not be increased as much. It will increase from 3 billion euros to over 4 billion euros. Rural development financing will stay on more or less the same level. Some funds were added from the recovery fund. So we're talking about 6 billion going down to 5 billion. So generally speaking, Lithuania had 4.7 billion in the previous period, and now we'll have 4.6 billion. As you see, about 900 million difference, and it's very important that the farmers actually feel that, so that their competitiveness increases, so that their work efficiency increases, so that new farms are developed, young farmers develop their farms. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that promises given to Lithuania when it accessed EU, that in 2013 the funding will be equal to other to funding of other countries. Unfortunately, this word was not kept. We only managed to negotiate that it will reach about 85% of the average of the EU. So we are not fully competitive. On the other hand, the Eastern countries, the Baltic countries, and Lithuania need a lot of investment when developing and establishing their farms. In this aspect, the old Europe has been has a long-term tradition, a long-term development, and we have to catch up. It will be more difficult for us to fulfill all the requirements. The European Parliament always thought that new requirements should be accompanied by new funding. And as I said, different strategies have been discussed: biological diversity from field to table, all sorts of other initiatives should be compensated to the farmers. Otherwise, they will not be able to implement those initiatives. Or there must be an agreement with the processors, with the sellers, and the food chain should be developed. One of the most important priorities for this period is about fair pricing and fair payments. This issue has been on the agenda for a long time. In countries with less direct payments, usually we see lower prices of buying agricultural products from farmers. The cooperation is very poorly developed in the Baltic states and in the European Union, in Eastern Europe, and in this field we have to improve a lot to help people cooperate in all industries, not only selling raw materials, but also in processing. It is also very important that Lithuania implements the short chain principle as soon as possible. For that, we need to change public procurement laws so that in every village, in every city, and in every town, people would be able to use their own products rather than bring them from other countries, which leads to a poor quality and also to suffering of local farmers. So those short chains will allow for us to have more possibilities to organize local production and having local raw materials and local processing. Finally, I always encourage people to contribute to the implementation of anti-food waste program. An average European throws away about 100 kilograms of good food. So this is something we really need to work on with the supermarkets to avoid throwing away good products, with schools, university, health organizations, public catering. Here we could really save 20% of raw materials, and it means that we would have to grow less if we don't waste food. So these programs could be implemented starting today. I'm out of time now. Best greetings from Strasbourg. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Ir mes laimėjome. Pone Ropė, jums turiu, kadangi
Mr.
diskusija jau prasideda ir pirmąjį
Ropė,
klausimą.
I have one question for
Ar jūs
you.
dar su mumis?
So are you still connected? I hope that you are here.
Kiek sudėtinga priimti tokį dokumentą Europos
How difficult
parlamente?
it is to adopt such a document in the European Parliament, because sometimes we believe that the European Parliament is homogeneous or unanimous, if we may say it, sort of shapeless structure where everything is adopted in unison. And has there been any divisions within the European Parliament for adopting this? Well, looking back to the works of the European Parliament in 2018, the Parliament returned back to the European Commission this document for further review. There were various committee-level discussions taking place, but the most important thing was, let me put it this way. The European Parliament is the final institution. The European Commission puts forward its motion, and then the European Parliament deliberates on it. And therefore, the member states were calling for as much flexibility as possible in order to have them a freedom of choice. And the European Parliament has yielded to the pressure. And I believe 154 MEPs, if I'm not wrong, didn't support the initial proposal. And for that reason, and of course, we in the Baltic states, we are unhappy about not a full level convergence and not delivering on the promises, the ones that I have already covered in my intervention. There may be a lot of things happening in the European Parliament. There could be just a case of a tie, or there may be only one vote for or against, which ruins the proposal. In the last tenure, the Conservatives, the Socials and Conservatives, and they were in the majority, whereas in the current tenure of the Parliament, you have at least many more votes in order to pass a motion. So sometimes one of the three forces or political parties does not support the decision, and that's how the decision is not adopted. Mr. Pranckietis, can you hear us?
Ar ponas Pranckietis dar prisijungęs?
Do we have Mr. Pranckietis with us? Oh, yes, I see. Of course, I have some problems about the camera.
Kaip jūs vertinat pono Ropės
So, Mr. Pranckietis, what is your take on Mr. Ropės view, rather critical or not? Indeed, 90 million in plus. We got more than initially we were proposed. 900 million more. So in terms of the scale and the country size, have we indeed bargained much more? Well, we were talking more or less the same, but using the different words. Let me remind you another story. Back in 2012, at the time that the former period of the cap payments were introduced, there was a promise from the European Union that our payments were compared to reach 90% of the EU average. So we see that we haven't traveled very far over those past 10 years. And I would also like to react on the size of micro farms. It is up to the member states to interpret small farms. For us, it's 10 hectares farm. In Poland, a small farm, to be regarded as a small farm, you have to have 20 hectares. I fully agree to the 25% of the bonus to organic farmers. And now we only get 9%. And I really don't know how we're going to substantiate this further development if we don't get any funding. And I would also like to react to the use of pest control and the chemicals and fertilizers. We're all aware of that. But I believe that there are people participating in this conference who may have a different take on the story by way of using future technologies or smart technologies to deal with the challenges so that the fertilizers are applied according on a case by case rather than as a blanket decision for all the fields. I would also like to note that we're also involved in OECD, and the OECD's recommendations for Lithuania would be very much in line with the Green Deal's rules regulations. So it's either we are going to comply with the Green Deal, or the Green Deal is going to be brought to us. According to the OECD recommendations, the load, the fertilizer load, not used in agriculture, but rather the fertilizer waste, which is being washed into the drinking water, groundwater, that is an issue. I personally know Mr. Ropė for quite some time, and I don't think that we are conflicting each other, although we have been acting on different levels, but at least we agree on one thing, that all the measures have to be supported by funding. Mr. Ropė, you noted that 90% of EU farmers, they have the farms up to 10 hectares in size. And they will be eligible or not eligible for this program. What is the likelihood of the government persuading them to participate in these programs? Well, there was an exception made or derogation made. There have been many more on a table, but the final agreement with the council has only this derogation, that the farms up to 10 hectares in size, regardless of their status, they will be for crop rotation and for wetland preservation, they will be able to participate, they will be eligible. Maybe not all of them are going to contribute, not on a full scale. It will very much depend on the current occupation of that farm. What does it do at the moment? And whether these programs are going to be value for money, just as Mr. Pranckietis said. Well, it is quite a difference whether you get 50 euro or 500 euro for the same land plot. Nowadays, we hear about the requirement to introduce crop rotation, the preservation of meadows, or a certain percentage, up to 4% of all the fields, or even restoration of meadows. On the other hand, the ministry introduced various prohibitions on use of green fertilizer. So what happens if farmers are going to leave all the cut grass on the fields, and if this person is going to be sanctioned for that, for doing that? So the greening programs call for possibilities of a farmer to avail of all the possible technologies. So we shall not limit them. I have one leading question. Some time ago, Mr. Alešiūnas mentioned there is such a country as China. And you may know it that the grand wall of the Chinese wall was built for 200 years. And nowadays, we have that ambition by 2030 or by 2200 years the Chinese wall was built. So is it really possible that the EU is unanimous and to achieve its ambitious goals by as fast as by 2030, by 2040? Well, we have agreed by 2030 to reduce the carbon emissions not by 30, but by 50%. Nowadays, we are drafting rules and regulations. There is going to be some social tax. There will be some financial possibilities. How to implement the programs to cut down on the emissions by 50%. We have to bear in mind that the key pollutants are industry, transport, and others. So in Lithuania, we have the transportation field as the key pollutant. We have to look for the solutions. And it would be very important to start from the public transport or transport or vehicles used by the ministries or by public authorities to set an example. If we don't do this, if we don't act ourselves, if we don't make an example of ourselves, then how can we expect others to follow? And the monitoring is expected to happen every year, not every 5 years. So every year we will see how good the states are at delivering on their promises. And on the basis of that, the funding will be made available. The EU is at the moment the only one having set itself such ambitious goals. And you may know that Germany has also set its own ambitious goals. So there are some processes taking place, and we have to do it in common sense. We shall not lose common sense by not making the situation of our people worse. At the same time, we shall be very clear the way we are moving forward and to live better, not at the expense of the future or at the expense of the people. Mr. Pranckietis, before coming to politics, you were a farmer yourself. And even under the new scheme, you were a small farmer. How would you, what would be your ideas about your farm, given the political decisions that have been made with regard to small farms? Mr. Pranckietis has not unmuted himself. Can Mr. Pranckietis hear us? He's nodding in agreement, but now we can hear. Now we can hear you. Can I talk? I heard your question. First of all, allow me to pick up on what Mr. Ropė said about the farmers. We have to respect our social stakeholders, and we have to have a very clear message sent for them, what they can do. Allow me to introduce some correction about the reference meadows. The ministry agreed that the reference meadows shall be set on a national scale, so not on a farm level scale, but on a national scale. So the problem is dealt with. With regard to the social fund, it is still under the discussion, and Lithuania has set its ambition. And after post 2032, what is going to happen? Are we going to have it or not? In response to your question about a small farm, by the way, I've been farming for 20 years. I was very proud of being self-sufficient, and we managed to live by on 1 hectare, and we earned as much as I would wish everybody to be so economically viable on such a small scale. And we had this niche production. Well, it's not a solution for everybody. Not everybody raising 2 or 3 cows can expect to have a decent level. And we have some niche type of production which have a future. So would you still have to change anything on that 1 hectare farm in order to meet the current requirements? Or Or do you believe that there is some segment of farms that are not going to be affected at all by the new requirements? Do you think that some of the farms will have to adapt to the Green Deal? Well, if we're not going to adapt to the Green Deal is going to adapt to us. We're not talking about exceptional requirements that are completely impossible. The rules have to be very clear, and that is the problem. We do not have very clearly set rules. We only have the ambitions set for us, but we do not have the rules. How to do that? Mr. Ropė, would you agree with Mr. Pranckietis that nowadays we have a very interesting situation? We have the political agenda, the money has been allocated, but there are no clear rules how to make this happen. Well, when it comes to the final rules, they should be set in motion by 2023, because the new period of the CAP policy is going to be launched only as of 2023. Lithuania, the ministry and the MEPs of Lithuania shall hear the farmers' voice. You cannot make decisions in your ivory tower. And we are sort of trying to create the life for the farmers, but we shall listen to the farmers. Maybe they are going to do even more than we could imagine. And in that way, we're going to have double the benefits than we had hoped for. And in order not to abuse the working conditions, the new cap as of 2025, there will be a new requirement for appropriate working conditions for people working on the farm. And that will be directly linked with the direct payments. Can I react to what Mr. Ropė said? Yes, of course. I would fully agree, and this is what I emphasized twice. Our social partners, our farmers have to be heard, and these OECD's recommendations also are very clear about it, that those regional populations should have a say on the life in the regions, rather than it would be somebody in the capital who decide how the regions should live. So I'm very happy that at least on that we agree. And let us hope for the future that our farmers and our stakeholders are going to have their life much easier rather than more difficult. Thank you very much. So we complete the first part of the discussion. We had Viktoras Pranckietis, the chairman of the Rural Affairs Committee of the Seimo of the Republic of Lithuania.
Lietuvos Respublikos Seimo Kaimo reikalų komiteto.
And a former farmer. And Mr. Ropė, MEP. Thank you very much for participating in our discussion. Thank you very much for having us. And now the next speaker would be MEP Herbert Dorfmann and Arūnas Svitojus. So please, Mr. Herbert, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning from Strasbourg. I hope you can see me and you can hear me. Well, it's a pleasure to be connected with you and to have the possibility to use these digital devices which we learned to use in the last 2 years. I think this is a positive result of one of the few positive results of this terrible pandemic situation we have. Yeah, just some remarks from my side. I'm an Italian MEP, member of the European Parliament, coming from the northwest part of Italy, here in the European Parliament, member of the EPP group, so the European People's Party, and coordinator, so responsible for agriculture inside my political group, which is the biggest group in the European Parliament. And in the last year, I was also rapporteur, so responsible for the dossier, for the report the European Parliament did on the Farm to Fork strategy, a report which we voted in the last plenary season 1 month ago here in Strasbourg. So let me give you just a short overview about the Farm to Fork strategy and our opinion here in the Parliament and this report we prepared here in the European Parliament. I overall think that the approach of the European Commission to have a strategy which starts from the farm and goes to the consumer through the elaboration, so the industry and the distribution of food is a right approach. I think it is a right approach, a good approach to go beyond the pure agriculture policy, farming policy, and see the whole chain if it comes to a green food system, a greener, a more sustainable food system in Europe, if it comes to a better food system, also a more balanced food system in Europe. And I think it's also in the interest of every element of this chain. So the farmers, the industry, the distribution, and the consumer itself to have a high value food chain in Europe and a safe food chain in Europe. But beyond this principle, I think the strategy as it was presented more than 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, in May of last year by the European Commission, is very weak in considering the whole chain. Because if I look from the farm to the fork, it again remains very much on the farm side. And this underlines the fact that all the numerical real objectives, reduction objectives in the farm to fork strategy are on the farm side. And these are the objectives debated in public. So there is in the farm to fork strategy the idea to reduce the use of pesticides by 50%, to reduce the use of antibiotics by 50%, to reduce the fertilizers by 20%, to come to 25% share of organic farming, and this is all figures, numbers on the farm side. The only figure, the only number which is not on objective, it's not on the farm side, is the food waste objective. So the idea to reduce food waste by 50% till the end of this decade. Food waste is a problem which we have through the whole chain. So starts in the farm and ends in the fridge or on the plate, on the fork of the consumer. And I think if we want to achieve, and I say this clearly in my report I drafted here in the European Parliament, if we want to achieve these objectives, which fundamentally I welcome, I think it's a good approach to try to reduce the input of pesticides, of fertilizers, of antibiotics. But if we want to achieve this, we need two fundamental important things. First of all, we need to give to the farmers alternatives. And this means that if the farmer needs to reduce pesticides, I'm convinced farmers are not using pesticides or fertilizers today for nothing. They use it because they need it, they need to protect the plants. If we find other possibilities to achieve the same goal, so maybe, for example, new, more resistant plants, and we will have, for example, on Monday, a very important conference in the European Commission about new breeding techniques in agriculture. For sure, I think the farmers are the first one to be happy if they have available plants which are more resistant and where they need to treat less. Or, for example, the organic farming objective. Fine, I think the 25% is achievable. But we need, on the other side, on the consumer side, the willing to create a market. So the consumer need to buy organic products. And this is a responsibility of the consumer and of the distribution, because the supermarkets need to give to these products a permanent space. And this is essential, because I think it would make no sense to push simply on the production of organic products without giving or trying to give for these organic products a clear market orientation. So have a market for these products and guarantee on the market that these products are a bit more expensive. And overall, I think in the Farm to Fork strategy, the two very important elements, the food industry, or for the food industry, and for the distribution, so for the supermarkets fundamentally, the Commission made the life quite easy, because they obliged them to create a self-conduct, rules of conduct, which they draft themselves. And I don't want to be too critical towards supermarkets. But honestly, I need to say, at least in the last years, when supermarkets decided themselves how to become more consumer-oriented, more responsible in the chain, this was not so successful. And I think if we want to have a better food chain, a more sustainable food chain, this will, not always, but in some cases, this will increase costs, especially on the farm side. And this increasing costs or are distributed along the chain, because it cannot be supported only by the farmers. So, or the chain, the industry and the distribution, the supermarkets, assume part of this additional cost. Otherwise, this additional cost needs to go to the consumer. And here we need to be clear to the consumer. And this is the second important thing. The consumer cannot continuously ask for more sustainable food, for local food, for organic food, and then go to the supermarket trying to find the cheapest food. This does not work. The consumer needs to be aware that he or she has an extremely important role if it comes to the functioning of the whole chain. We had a debate on the front of pack labeling. As you know, there is in some parts of Europe, or some member states are insisting on new front of pack labeling systems, which are more or less traffic light systems like the Nutri-Score. I'm very skeptical about this. I think first of all, we have to educate consumers to a more responsible nutrition. For sure, labeling needs to inform, but I have the impression that a system like the Nutri-Score is not only easy understandable, it is also simplistic. And sometimes it does not inform, but it is simply an instrument for the industry or for the distribution, so for the supermarkets to impose some products to the consumers. And for sure, another important thing is animal welfare. Here we had a very important debate on how to go on animal welfare. There is for sure also here in the parliament very strong voice who thinks that we should all become vegan or vegetarians. This I don't think, but we have to admit, and this we do in this report, to say that we have consumers in Europe who consume too much meat. So we have to address overconsumption of meat. We do not have to address consumption. We need to address overconsumption of meat if we want to come to a more balanced diet. So just two words on the future steps. We voted this report more or less 1 month ago here in the European Parliament with a large majority, more than 450 votes in favor, 170 votes against. Now the Commission needs to start to implement this strategy, because this strategy for now is a strategy. It is not a law. And in the next years, we expect lawmaking. So we expect new rules, which will affect the whole chain. And on this, we should start now. The first important step are for sure the strategic plans, which the member states are preparing now in the context of the reform of the common agricultural policy. But after this, we will have different initiatives for new directives and new regulations, which we will observe and will speak about here in the European Parliament. And where this, with this I close, where and this was also a content of an amendment which I tabled. We are expecting from the European Commission a proper impact assessment. So each lawmaking step we are making here in the European Parliament, we need to know what are the effects on food safety and also on food security, because it is clear that we should do everything to have a sustainable agriculture, a balanced diet, but it's also sure that we need to do everything to give enough food for our consumers, for our 450 million people in Europe every day. I think this we should never forget. Thank you very much.
Kad šitame segmente visgi nėra tik tais ūkininko, politiko ir pirkėjo, kad pakankamai daug įvairių sudedamųjų dalių ir kartais jos tokios net nelabai prognozuojamos. O kaip šitam neprognozuojamam pasaulyje gyvens mūsų ūkininkai, mums papasakos ponas Svitojus.
We are going to hear from Mr. Svitojus, the chair or the president of the Lithuanian Agricultural Chamber. Good day to everybody. I'm very happy to be part of this forum at the time when the European Parliament is deliberating the CAP policy. And in terms of the agricultural areas, and agriculture is our starting point where we shall always focus our actions. In this plenary session, Ms. Taylor mentioned a meeting in Glasgow. And there was this on the CAP 26, and so we have heard many new introduced ideas, such as CO2 emissions, in order to achieve the global warming by less than 1.5 degrees of centigrade, as well as that we shall implement the Paris Agreement. We talk about the increase of the human population. We're talking about 8 billion, maybe even 9 billion. Who knows how many of the people are still going to live on the earth? So these all bring a lot of new challenges. Coming to the fossil fuels, we are even increasing the challenge even further with the atmospheric pollution on a much higher levels than before. But we're only using the words, such as the depleting biodiversity or climate change. And these are all the words which are somewhat distant from ourselves. But I think we can speak in the language of images. Well, we may take Africa. It may seem a distant country, but what happens in Africa then has a domino effect elsewhere. So all of us agree and understand what is happening in Africa or in other remote areas, that whatever is happening there is going to have an effect on all of us. There is this growing understanding and public awareness. And even though we may believe that this is not for us, that it is not our future, but it may well be that we're going to have climate migrants from Africa moving in millions simply because there is no more drinking water and the continent is uninhabitable. And the people naturally will move northwards just because of the lack of the drinking water. Moving on to Lithuania, I'm very happy to see the CAP policy up until the 27th year, and we have been new goals that were set for us. At the same time, we have to be realistic. We're talking about 6 billion, which is quite a good thing. And we shall never forget that this funding is not given just for nothing. The society trusts the farmers, and the society extends the support to the farmers so that they can implement the tasks set for them. And these are the fundamental tasks. The society expects to have a better, healthier living standard, that the food produced has less antibiotics or fertilizers or residual fertilizers in the food products. And we have to be very realistic. There is only a fraction of farmers who do understand and who take these initiatives on board. We have to innovate further. And one of the key areas is to ensure that our countryside is a living organism, that it is not abandoned areas of land where only the robots operate. And we're talking about innovations or the introduction of smart technologies, but we shall always have the people in mind. And this is how we have those strategic goals that are being set for us. I believe that we still have some time for discussing the goals. And first of all is food. Not food for only us, but also for the whole of the world. And if we have any problems with the food production chain, then we're going to have them here as well. We have to improve the status of the farms so that the farms stay and continue producing. So the farmers have to be both sustainable and resilient in a long-term perspective. So that we have the food, we have to invest into the climate change mitigation measures. Also, Taylor and other speakers mentioned that there should be a balance, needs to be struck between a consumer and a farmer, a balance between the nature and the social issues. And in order to ensure this balance, we have to think not only in political terms, but also in scientific terms, how we can ensure sustainability in the longer run. And therefore, we have also to think about viability. Viability is not going to happen if we are only thinking about today and not thinking about tomorrow. We have to be future-looking. We have to be future-proof in order to be resilient. And we shall not put too much of a burden on a future generation where the employment in rural areas is going to be, well, it is difficult now to predict what kind of an employment level we're going to have in rural areas or in industrial areas. If we only have vertical farming, And we always have to ensure the public interests. So we have major goals. Food viability and sustainability leads us to the future and makes us future-proof. And the Green Deal initiative, we always talk about the Green Deal initiative. There are many people living in the world. Soon we're going to have 8 billion people. All of them need some food to live by and to get cheap and safe food. And we always have to strike a balance between the needs of the society and the availability of the food. When it comes to the CAP, I had a very good time to prepare. We talked to our colleagues from Italy, from Sweden, Poland, how well they were in drafting their programs. And the Swedes, they have their own strategy by 2030. The Danish, they have by 2030. And they have agreed upon it even already a year ago. So they have the strategic goals already set for the future, whereas we have nothing at the moment on the table. We have to learn from others. And it is indeed a possibility for us to do that. When I ask the Swedes what they do, they have the cycles. They are trying to integrate the society, and they are integrating the social partners in order to resolve the issues in unison. We cannot impose certain decisions or decision-making fatigue on the farmers alone. It is up to the society also to take its bit and to do its bit to make it happen. And we often forget that the society also has a role to play in agricultural achievements. So we have the Swedish model, which we took, and the similar models also exist in Denmark. And we can conjure up something of our own. So we have to be responsible for the land where we live, the land that we cultivate. And this is the goal, or this is the land that we've been given by our ancestors for many thousand years before us. And we have to be forward-looking. We shall be future-proof. Think in terms of 4 to 5 generations ahead in order to be viable and in order to be fully responsible, not only towards ourselves, but also towards the future generations. Farmers have nothing against the Green Deal ideas. We do understand that changes are inevitable and that modern or smart technologies are inevitable and that biotechnologies and information technologies can lend a helping hand for the farmers in order to make our life easier and more productive or more viable. So the key issue for the farmer is who is going to pay for all this? The farmers have to modernize themselves, and we expect to get in cheap and safe food. So there's always this confrontation between the producer and the consumer. And a consumer, by using many products, we are all polluting the nature because we need more of everything. And at the same time, we shall always strike a balance between the different needs. Just as Mr. Herbert mentioned, from farm to fork, it entails a number of segments, whereas the production and the consumer, those two extremes, they should sit around the same table and think along the same lines. The Swedish example is a good one. It is not the government, but the stakeholders, the social partners sat around the table and discuss what is relevant for them. And we shall learn from the best practices, such as Sweden. In Sweden already, there is a free of charge catering or food allowances for all the kids in Swedish schools, and kids are being given organic food and healthy food to eat at schools. So the Swedes are moving towards carbon neutral and locally produced food products, which is good for everybody, good for the economy, good for the people, good for the nature. And it's very much preserves the nature. And I see that my time is up. So my last slide, with my last slide, I would like to focus of Mr. Espinosa's, the one who is in charge of the climate change from the United Nations. This is not just plain rhetoric. This is it is not politics. This is our reality. This is science, and the science shows us the results. And these are the fundamental tools and the measures that we have to apply. This is an early warning for us. In Lithuania, we have to see not only the challenges, but also the opportunities at the same time. Lithuania is a good green country. We have plenty of fresh drinking water. We have diligent people who want to work and to earn their living, and we have an understanding how to do it best. So I would like to wish everybody, the society, the farmers, and the social stakeholders, everybody to make the right decisions and do their bit for the common good.
Ačiū už puikų pranešimą. Nepabėkit, ar padiskutuosim, ar viskas teisinga.
Thank you. Please stay for a discussion.
Viena kalba bus paprasčiau. Pone Dorfmanai, girdėjau, kad jūs esate toks
Mr. Dorfmann, we heard that you are a supporter of short food chains. How could short food chains change the current situation, reduce food waste and so on? How could short food chains contribute to changing the situation?
Well, I think we need the right balance. As the President said before, we do not have in Europe only a responsibility to feed the Europeans. And this is not possible only with short food chains. We have also a responsibility around the world because we are the biggest exporters of food all around the world. And this has nothing to do with short food chains. But on the other way, I think I'm convinced that the food supply chain will become more diversified, and there are a lot of consumers which like short food chains. They like local markets. They like local products, and I think we should give them an opportunity to buy these products. And this is also an opportunity for farmers in the region, in the rural areas. But I'm far away to believe that we can have a food supply system in Europe which is based only on short supply chains or local food markets. I think we need both. We need local markets, but we need also the common market and the big food market in Europe.
Pone Svitojau, kaip sako ponas Dorfmanas, neišvengsime to, kad būtų tik vietinis maistas vartojamas vietoje. Ar Lietuvai tai būtų naudinga, jeigu mes nueitume Švedijos kelius? Mes visgi esame eksportuojanti šalis. Ir kiekvieną kartą kalbame, jog mūsų išsigelbėjimas yra aukštos kokybės, didelės pridėtinės vertės maisto produktų eksportas. Iš kitos pusės, kaip pavyzdį pateikiam Skandinavus, kur didžioji dalis yra vartojama vietoje.
In Scandinavia, much is consumed locally. How to ensure the balance? Well, we should strive for the balance. We should keep in mind the figures. When we speak about export, we export raw materials, grain and timber, and we bring in flour, which is 3-4 times more expensive. We bring in bread, which is 10 times more expensive, and we lose 10 times of added value. So this export, we actually deplete our land, just like Africa depletes its land in terms of natural deposits, and then brings in something else. This is what we have to emphasize. We don't have a short food chain. We have maybe some small elements, and we don't supply ourselves with our products. We lack vegetables, we lack pork. We have to diversify our markets. We have to diversify our production and not encourage producing more raw materials, because the new billions which will be allocated to Lithuania, they have to be used to reform our agriculture. And yes, we are behind in terms of cooperations, as Mr. Ropė mentioned. We are behind 10 times behind of Austria, but we will have funding and we will have a possibility to make our businesses more efficient. And as Mr. Dorfmann said, we can ensure necessary conditions for the short food chain to work, like in Italy, for example. And this is something we should study and learn from them and share good practices and good experience. We have to look at the countries which do have this good practice, and we should learn. And then Lithuania will be able to share its own experience, their own achievements. So this good practice is something that will encourage us. Mr. Dorfmann, we're talking about several models which become standards. Will a few models be suitable for the entire Europe with all its diversity?
First of all, I fully share what seemed said before. Clearly, it is positive, and I think the new common agricultural policy, especially the second pillar of the common agricultural policy, gives to the member state, Lithuania, in your case, the possibility to invest in processing food, in producing more food, and not producing only big commodities. On the other way around, we have a big advantage in Europe that we have very different climate situations, and producing wheat in Lithuania, most probably, and cereals is Lithuania has a perfect climate, but to produce wine is better in Italy. So we have a trade inside Europe also from this perspective. To your question, I think we had a long debate here in the European Parliament how common this common agriculture policy should be. So how European, how many common rules there should be, and how much responsibility should be in the member states. And I was always in favor of an approach to say we need to find a balance between this, because clearly if there are rules which influence on competition in Europe, so on the market in Europe, as long as we have a common market, we need to have also common rules, because otherwise we create an unfair competition inside Europe, and this cannot be in the interest of the farmers. But if it comes to for example, on in the first pillar, on the definition, which are the interesting or good eco schemes for a region or for a member state, I think the demands and the necessities in Lithuania are completely different from my region. I'm living in the middle of the Alps, so the environmental challenges are completely different compared with you. So why should we not give to the member states the possibility to decide by themselves? As you said before, if you have to invest in cooperation, because this you do not have it, it is good that you, with your strategic plan, you are preparing now, you invest in cooperation, in cooperatives, and I am aware how difficult this is in regions like yours, where there is a very bad, let's say, history experience with cooperatives. But in my place at home, I don't need to invest in cooperatives, because most of the production we have are sold by cooperatives because we have very small farmers, and the farmers cannot go alone to the market. They need a system of cooperation. This has been established since decades. So there is different needs, and I think this degree of sustainability we should give to the member states. By the way, if you look at the two pillars of the common agriculture policy, the first and the second pillar, for decades now, the second pillar with the rural development plans was always a very national and even regional approach. We had many hundreds of different rural development plans in Europe, and it worked. I don't think that the second pillar of the common agriculture policy today is working worse than the first pillar. I even think that the second pillar is maybe the most modern policy than the first pillar.
Pone Svitojau, mes vėlgi kalbame apie trumpas grandinės, vėl kartojasi. Ūkininkų iniciatyvą ir panašius dalykus.
Mr. Svitojus, we are talking about that the EU acknowledges that the market will be strictly regulated. Is it beneficial for the farmers and the buyers or not? Or do you think we will encounter some kind of side effects? It's a good question. And it was mentioned in the EP that, okay, there are rules, everyone should follow the rules, but they will be flexible, and every country will have to implement them in view of the circumstances. And as Herbert said, yes, we have different conditions in Europe, it's true, but the rules are also being developed in view of this. Wine was a very good example. Italians are good in producing wine, but they don't bring their grapes to us to process. They do it in their own villages. And it's a very important aspect to ensure livelihood, traditions, and well-being of local communities and villages. This is something about viability. So we're not bringing grapes to Lithuania, we are bringing in wine. And it's exactly the same with us. We should export cheese and maybe curd. And now I'm going back to the idea that we do have the same rules in Europe, but we have to be creative and decide locally on the best and the most effective way of spending the funds. So we have to be innovative, we have to be creative, we have to be wise, so that we have a good potential not only to 2030, not to 2050. We have to have a vision for 200 years so that we promote our agriculture and our development. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the great discussion. I think what Mr. Svitojus said is very important. We have to be creative and wise. Once you're wise, you can put together the plan of actions. Once we understand the processes, where they're useful, how to make them useful, then we should start acting. We had Mr. Bronis Ropė, member of the European Council, Viktoras Pranckietis, chairman of the Rural Affairs Committee of the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania, Herbert Dorfmann, member of the European Parliament, and Arūnas Svitojus, chairman of the Chamber of Agriculture of Association of Republic of Lithuania, and me, the editor of Lithuanian Agro. Please stay tuned.
Robotika, agromaisto sektorius.
We now have a robotic session for the agriculture. The discussion will be moderated by Kristina Šermukšnytė Alekšiūnienė, and she will tell you